By the time the backroom door banged shut, Harlem knew what kind of night it was. A man with a loud suit and louder mouth came in like he owned the walls, shoulders set, grin sharp, cigarette burning down to an ash he never tapped. He didn't greet the elders. He talked over them. He laughed at the old rules like they were bedtime stories, and he called it progress. "You boys been eating off crumbs," he said, pacing, pointing, making every word a shove. "Starting tonight, there's a new tax. My tax. Everybody pays. Stores, numbers, trucks, don't matter. If it moves in Harlem, it moves through me." Chairs creaked. A few men shifted, not from fear, but from the insult of being spoken to like furniture. The rival soaked it in, mistaking restraint for surrender, feeding on his own echo. At the center of it all stood Bumpy Johnson, still as a sign, eyes steady, face unreadable. He didn't argue. Didn't smile. He let the noise run its course, like letting a man swing until his arms got tired. In that silence, Bumpy wasn't giving permission. He was measuring, learning where the arrogance ended and the hunger began. The rival stopped pacing and leaned in close enough to smell the smoke on his breath. "So what's it gonna be, Bumpy?" he whispered. Nobody answered. Even the ash seemed to hold. And then the room went quiet in a way that didn't belong to peace. 12 seconds can feel like a lifetime when nobody dares to fill it. The rival's grin stayed on his face, but it started to stiffen, like he'd realized his own voice had been doing all the work. No music seeped through the walls. No one cleared a throat to rescue him. Just breathing, slow, careful, and the faint creak of a chair as one of the elders eased his weight, testing whether the floor itself would betray him. Somewhere in that stillness came a soft click. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in a peaceful conversation, the kind that makes every man in the room remember what he carries and what he left in the car. The rival's eyes flicked, hunting for the source, trying to turn the silence into something he could manage. Bumpy didn't move. He stood there with the calm of a man who already knew the ending, watching the rival's confidence bump into the wall of Harlem's patience. In those seconds, Bumpy wasn't deciding whether to fight. He was deciding what disrespect cost tonight, whether it needed a lesson whispered into the street, or a warning that couldn't be misunderstood. The rival tried to laugh again, but it came out thin. He leaned back a fraction, like his body had started listening before his pride could catch up. Bumpy's gaze stayed steady, not cold, not angry, measured. Silence, for him, wasn't absence. It was a weapon he could hold without showing it. Then Bumpy finally spoke, quiet enough to make everyone lean in. "Lock the door," he said. And the key turned with a clean, final sound that told the whole room this was never a negotiation. No papers came out, no hands were shaken, only consequences waiting to begin. Harlem wasn't just brick and brownstone. It was reputation, passed hand to hand like currency. It was protection you could feel when you walked a certain block at night, and the lack of it when you didn't. It was who got to breathe easy behind a counter, who got to sleep with both eyes closed, and who had to keep one ear open for footsteps that didn't match the hour. That back room held more than men. It held the balance. Because one moment, one story told the right way, could tilt the whole neighborhood. The rival understood that. He didn't come for money first. He came for the sound of Harlem itself. He wanted fear to travel faster than truth, wanted shop owners and runners to repeat his name in low voices until it became law. If he could make Bumpy Johnson bend in front of witnesses, the rest would fold on their own. Bumpy knew it too. That's why he'd let the man talk. Harlem watched the quiet as much as it watched the loud. A loud man could take a corner for a night. A quiet man could hold a city for a generation. And Bumpy had never confused noise for power. He understood that if this rival walked out of here still smiling, every other mouth in Harlem would learn a new kind of disrespect. The air in the room felt heavy with choices nobody wanted to make out loud. Men who'd stood together before were suddenly measuring each other's faces, imagining what side they'd be forced onto by morning. The rival mistook that tension for victory. He straightened, voice rising like he could command the room again. "Listen," he said, spreading his hands. "You got until tomorrow night. Everybody pays. Or Harlem learns what happens when I don't get my due." A deadline. a ticking clock, and a promise Harlem wasn't going to like hearing twice. The deadline sounded bold, but it wasn't the first time he'd tried to write rules in somebody else's neighborhood. Harlem had seen men like him, men who confused pressure for authority. The real mistake wasn't walking into Bumpy's room with swagger. It was what he'd done earlier, out in the open, where everybody could carry it home. He picked a Sunday afternoon. One of Bumpy's runners, young loyal, was collecting quiet dues the way Harlem had always done it. Respectful, steady, no theater. The rival stepped in like a showman. He didn't just stop the kid. He made him look small. He laughed, took the envelope from his hand, and turned to the men watching like he was performing. Then he pressed a roll of bills against the boy's chest, slow and insulting, like money could replace the rules. "Tell Bumpy I'm paying him early," he said, loud enough for the block. "And tell him it's the last time." The kid didn't swing. He didn't beg. He just stood there, swallowing the humiliation because the code said you don't start a war in daylight unless your boss tells you. That was the code the rival didn't understand. Respect wasn't decoration. It was the lock on the whole neighborhood. Break it in public, and you didn't just offend a man, you unbalanced the street. That night, the rival tried to fix it. He sent more money, stacked high, and a message stacked higher. He talked like forgiveness was a receipt you could buy, like loyalty was for sale if the price was high enough. And when the elders didn't answer, he followed with threats, names, addresses, little details that said he'd been watching. Bumpy listened to every word, not because he was shaken, but because it showed the rival's shape. Predictable. Impatient. Needing witnesses. A man who couldn't stop himself from turning every move into a spectacle. That was when Bumpy understood the truth. This rival wasn't going to stop at a tax or a deadline. Not unless he was taught a lesson the whole neighborhood could repeat, and tell it for years. Bumpy didn't treat violence like fire. He treated it like medicine, measured doses, right moment, no waste. Men who erupted did it to feel powerful. Bumpy didn't need the feeling. He needed the result. That's why he could stand in a room full of noise and look like nothing was happening, while his mind was already arranging what came next. He studied the rival the way some men studied horses, watching the gait, the breath, the little tells that revealed what was underneath the show. The rival performed. Boys. He talked for the doorway, not the table. He wanted his name to land in ears that weren't even in the room yet. He didn't just need money, he needed the story of taking it. That told Bumpy who the man was trying to impress, and how badly he feared being seen as anything less than unstoppable. Bumpy noticed the way the rival looked at the elders when he laughed, checking for flinches like applause. He noticed who the rival nodded at, who he tried to recruit with eye contact. He noticed what the rival never did. He never stayed quiet long enough to hear himself. Silence made him restless. Silence made him small. And Bumpy understood that a man who can't sit with quiet will always walk into a trap built out of it. That was the difference in Harlem. The neighborhood ran on a code, and a code only worked if people believed it held. Disrespect was a sickness. One man could cough it into a room and everybody would start breathing different. Let it spread and tomorrow every corner had its own rules. Every boy with a gun started acting like a king. So Bumpy's logic wasn't rage. It was quarantine. Contain it fast. Contain it clean. Make the consequences so clear nobody wanted to touch the same behavior again. He listened to the rival's deadline, and he didn't argue it. He didn't bargain. He just let the man think time was on his side. Then Bumpy turned to the nearest elder and spoke like he was ordering another drink. "Let him leave with his pride," he said softly, "and make sure he believes he won." It sounded like patience, but it was the first click of a trap closing. Bumpy didn't believe in one big swing. He believed in a clean sequence, small moves that looked like nothing until the other man was trapped inside them. First, he went after the rival's friends. Not with bullets. With doubt. A quiet word here, a favor called in there, a reminder that Harlem had long memory and longer reach. Men who'd been smiling at the rival's jokes suddenly found reasons to be busy. Phones stopped getting answered. Doors stopped opening all the way. Then Bumpy touched the money. Harlem wasn't powered by speeches. It was powered by flow, numbers, liquor, trucks, protection. Bumpy didn't have to steal the rival's cash. He just made it hard to collect. A couple runners got politely turned around. A store owner was reminded who kept his windows unbroken. A see-through warning traveled from block to block. Pay whoever you want, but don't pay twice. By the end of the week, the rival's new tax felt less like a law and more like a joke that wasn't landing. The rival responded the only way he knew, louder. More threats, more swagger, more public talk. Perfect. Noise meant he still thought this was about courage. It meant he didn't realize the timeline had already been rewritten. Bumpy's third move was the one that mattered most. He offered a meeting. Not as surrender, as a gift. A safe sit-down where everybody could keep their pride, where men could talk like businessmen and pretend the street wasn't watching. Bumpy made sure the rival heard the right version of it too, that Bumpy was feeling pressure, that the elders wanted peace, that Harlem was tired of tension. He fed the rival exactly what arrogance ate best. Because arrogance was easier to steer than caution. A cautious man checked corners. An arrogant man walked straight into the center of the room and demanded respect. That's why Bumpy chose the room before he chose the words. A backroom in Harlem the rival would recognize as neutral, familiar, comfortable, full of witnesses he'd want to impress. Bumpy smiled once, barely. "Bring him there," he said. "That's where he'll feel bold enough to forget who he's talking to." The rival didn't just give Harlem a deadline. He announced it like a verdict. 72 hours to pay up, hand over corners, surrender the quiet respect that kept the neighborhood stitched together, or he would make an example so loud nobody could pretend they didn't hear it. He promised broken windows, public blood, a story that would travel faster than any man could run from it. And he made sure the threat landed where it mattered most. In daylight, in front of witnesses, in the kind of voice that demanded fear as applause. Harlem heard it. Harlem tightened. Shop owners counted their money twice. Runners walked faster. Men who usually spoke with their eyes started speaking with their mouths. That was the rival's plan. Turn the clock into a panic, make everybody feel like they had to choose him just to survive the next 3 days. Bumpy let the clock run anyway. Not because he didn't care. Because he did. Because rushing was how men made mistakes, and Bumpy didn't waste Harlem's peace on impulse. While the rival performed, Bumpy moved like the neighborhood was holding its breath for him. He sent quiet messengers to the rival's helpers, the ones who smiled too wide and bragged too much. No threats. Just questions. Simple ones that burrowed under pride. Where are you going when this goes bad? Who's protecting your wife when the headlines hit? At the same time, Bumpy closed doors the rival didn't know existed. A driver suddenly had car trouble. A safe apartment got visited by a landlord asking strange questions. A bagman discovered his usual route wasn't safe anymore. It wasn't violence. It was pressure applied in the right places until escape routes became dead ends. Every hour, the rival grew more frantic, mistaking silence for weakness. He started calling meetings, raising his voice at his own people, demanding loyalty like a man trying to hold water in his hands. And every time he did, doubt spread wider. By the time the 72 hours were almost gone, Harlem felt different. Not scared, like something heavy had shifted into place. The rival walked into the meeting believing he was ending Bumpy. He didn't realize the countdown was ending him. The silence came back like it owned the room. 12 seconds with no arguing, no chairs scraping for comfort, no breath wasted on brave talk. Just the pull of air in and out of lungs, and that quiet click again, small, certain, like a line being drawn. The rival's mouth opened, searching for something sharp to throw, but even his arrogance hesitated. He could feel it. Harlem wasn't listening to him anymore. Harlem was listening to Bumpy. Bumpy didn't lean in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't decorate the moment with anger. His eyes stayed steady, calm as a closed door, and in that calm the decision was already finished. The rival tried to smile, tried to reclaim the room with posture, but the room had slipped out from under him. Men who'd been watching for entertainment were now watching for instruction. Bumpy's hand moved once, simple, practiced, gentle. 2 shots. Not a barrage. Not a tantrum. 2 clean answers that cut straight through the rival's performance and ended it mid-sentence. The sound didn't echo like drama, it landed like law. The rival didn't get a speech. Didn't get a legend. He got the silence he'd been too loud to understand. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The elders didn't flinch. The men at the edges didn't rush. They just absorbed what had changed. Because the terrifying part wasn't the gun. It was the timing. The restraint. The fact that Bumpy had let the rival talk himself into believing he was in control, then removed him like a bad habit. Bumpy lowered the weapon and looked around the room, letting the quiet settle into everyone's bones. Then he nodded toward one man still standing, pale and frozen. "Walk out," Bumpy said softly, "and tell it exactly." Bumpy didn't chase the noise that wanted to follow. He didn't bark orders, didn't turn the room into a parade of panic. He let the silence do its work, because silence, in Harlem, traveled farther than shouting ever could. Men would repeat what they couldn't explain. They would replay the calm on Bumpy's face, the way the loud man lost his voice without being granted a final word. He looked at the elders first, not for permission, but to make sure the story had witnesses who mattered. Then he looked at the doors, the corners, the men who'd come to watch a negotiation and ended up watching a correction. Bumpy understood something the rival never learned. A killing could be argued over, but a humiliation that happened in front of the right eyes became policy. The survivor stood there like he'd been emptied out, still holding his breath as if sound might bring the moment back. Bumpy didn't threaten him. Threats could be twisted. Bumpy gave him a job. "Say it clean," he told him. "No hero talk. No extra. Just the way it happened." That was the punishment. Not the shots. The repetition. A dead man could become a rumor. A dead man could become a martyr if people wanted him to be. But a living witness walking out into Harlem with the truth stamped into his voice. 2 shots, no rage, no bargain. That kind of truth didn't leave room for fantasy. It turned fear into a rule, because it made every ambitious man picture the same ending in the same room. By morning, the neighborhood wouldn't be talking about bravery. It would be talking about how the rival leaned in like he'd cornered Bumpy Johnson, and how the whole block went quiet before the lesson landed. The rival's new boss dream wouldn't be remembered as a threat. It would be remembered as a mistake. And somewhere across Harlem, the rival's former allies started scrambling, phones ringing, doors locking, faces changing, realizing the fantasy just died in public and it wasn't coming back. Harlem recalibrated overnight the way a streetlight changes. No announcement, just a new color everybody obeys. There were no headlines that matched what people already knew. The papers could call it a shooting, could wrap it in safe words and pretend it was random. Harlem didn't use safe words. Harlem used whispers. Harlem used glances across counters, long pauses before a man answered a question, and the quiet way a decision got made without anyone calling a meeting. By morning, the rival's name was already shrinking. Not erased, worse than that. Reduced. Turned into a warning that didn't deserve volume. Men who'd flirted with his new boss fantasy stopped saying they ever did. They paid what they owed where they'd always paid it. They corrected their posture. They remembered which sidewalks belonged to which rules. And Bumpy didn't walk around demanding worship. That wasn't his style. He didn't need parades or speeches. His power was clearer because it wasn't needy. It was boundary and consequence, cleanly enforced, like a line you didn't cross unless you wanted the world to change shape around you. The lesson wasn't that Bumpy was loud. The lesson was that he didn't have to be. Calm was more frightening than rage, because rage burned out. Calm waited. Calm chose. Calm acted only when the message would last. In New York City, stories lived longer than men. This one spread the way smoke spread, through hallways, through barbershops, through late-night dice games where somebody always swore they knew a guy who was there. 12 seconds of silence. 2 shots. One man walking out alive with the truth like an order. Years later, people would still repeat it, not for entertainment, but for guidance. A reminder stamped into Harlem's memory. Respect is the tax, and it always gets collected. Because when respect becomes law, anyone who forgets becomes the next lesson.